All right, shall we begin? Well, welcome everyone. My name is Don Edwards. I'm the chapter president for the Trinity Fork chapter of NIPSOT, and it's with pleasure that I welcome you to the session tonight. As you can see on your screen, we're going to be talking about the Carroll Abbott Garden at Riverside Nature Center, among other things. I want to thank the Kerrville chapter. The Native Plant Society of Texas Kerrville chapter created a garden at Riverside Nature Center in Kerrville that is dedicated to Carroll Abbott, NIPSOT's founder. This presentation will cover a brief biography of Carroll Abbott, followed by views of the garden and the native plants represented. Carroll Abbott is, as I said, usually the one given primary credit for creating the organization back in 1980. He was very, very active in many things, and you'll learn much more about that tonight. The session tonight is through a presentation, a narrated PowerPoint. So once we start it, the narrator will be part of the session. At the end of the PowerPoint presentation, stay tuned for the second part of the program. Some housekeeping rules. Please remember to stay muted and turn off your video camera. If you have questions or you want to make comments, please use the chat feature to do so. We really may need to call upon the audience to answer some of the questions because there are people that are going to be participating that will know more about plants and things than some of us over here talking to you right now. We don't have a person from the Kerrville chapter that's actively supporting this presentation. They did create the session that we're going to do. They created the PowerPoint and provided the narration. If you have questions about NIPSOT history, I want to remind you that you could join us Friday evening where Dr. Camelia Meyer, a member of the Trinity Fork chapter, will talk about the history of NIPSOT, and she is very, very much up to date on all of that. I don't know that she will be present tonight, but she would be someone really good to ask questions about. At this time, I'm going to do a handoff of this session to Patricia Edwards, who's my wife and is sitting about 4 feet away from me on a Mac computer. So we're going to switch from PC to Mac. Give us a few seconds to do that, and then she will cover the rest of the session tonight. So let me stop sharing, and I'm going to over to you.
Okay, good evening. I'm about to launch the PowerPoint that Don just gave us an introduction to. And just so you know, the Kerrville team did a lot of work and research in putting this together, and they have included some photos of primary and secondary resources. So to allow for reading time, the transition period between slides for some of these will be a little bit longer. I just didn't want you to think there was something going on with the slide. So if there's reading material there, know that the slide will transition, but maybe not at the pace that you were expecting it to. So let me get to share the screen. All right. And hopefully you're seeing what I'm seeing, my PowerPoint.
On behalf of the Kerrville chapter of the Native Plant Society of Texas, I welcome you to an overview of the Carroll Abbott Garden, located at the Riverside Nature Center in Kerrville, Texas. On NIPSOT's 40th anniversary, we honor its founder, Carroll Abbott. This presentation will cover a brief biography of Mr. Abbott, followed by a description and views of the garden itself. By way of background, the native plant garden was created and is maintained by members of the Nipsot-Kerrville chapter. It includes more than 70 species of plants that were mentioned in Carroll Abbott's many wildflower newsletters. The garden was completed and dedicated in April of 2016. Carroll Abbott was born in Texarkana in 1926. While he was still an infant, the family moved to the Houston area where he grew up. He developed his interest in wildflowers and plants as a young child. Growing up in the Depression years, he would help his family financially by digging bulbs and plants he found along railroad tracks and highways and selling these to nurseries. He often made more money for the family than his father, who worked as a handyman and a preacher. While still in high school, Abbott began his journalism career, working at the Houston Post newspaper. After high school graduation, and he was the first in his family to achieve that level of education, he moved to California and began work at a local newspaper. He received a scholarship and attended USC for 2 years, but an illness forced his return to Houston. Back in Houston, he met and married his wife, Pat, in 1947. He continued working for various newspapers and TV stations. All the while, he never lost his interest in wildflowers and plants. He spent his weekends driving to the Rio Grande Valley to purchase plants he would then sell in Houston. Carroll's parents had moved to Kerrville in 1948. In 1955, he and Pat moved their family to Kerrville, where he began work at what is today the Kerrville Daily Times. At the time, it was a weekly publication. It wasn't long before Carroll became the editor, and meanwhile, his family was growing to include 4 children, 3 boys and a girl. While still working at the Kerrville newspaper, Carroll Abbott used his writing and people skills to begin running political campaigns. By 1961, he worked for the State Democratic Executive Committee, running campaigns for several politicians. He helped on one of John Connolly's campaigns by sending out 10,000 packages of seeds as a promotion. As he traveled across the state working on campaigns, he logged information on the wildflowers he found, their growing conditions, their bloom periods. More importantly, he became concerned as he noticed the decline in wildflowers due to new building development, to mowing practices, and careless picking. As he was continuing his work for the Democratic Party, his fellow Texan and wildflower enthusiast, Lady Bird Johnson, was leading a national movement to beautify highways. Her efforts led to the passing of the National Highway Beautification Act. Their common interest and passion for wildflowers led to their friendship and work together on many projects. Here's one example of their correspondence. This is a letter from Mrs. Johnson dated December 1978, where they shared thoughts on their respective wildflower projects. In 1970, as his public relations work became most successful, Carroll Abbott abruptly resigned and returned to Kerrville. He would spend his remaining years focused on his passionate work with wildflowers. While he promoted the planting of the wildflowers, he realized that seeds were not readily available. So he started his own company, Green Horizons. For more than 10 years, that company would not see a profit. So to earn extra money, he sold plants for small landscape jobs. Sales of his bluebonnet seeds helped him through the lean years of his startups. In 1973, he continued efforts to promote wildflower awareness, becoming an unpaid Texas lobbyist to the Texas legislature for wildflowers and wildflower preservation. In 1976, Carroll started a quarterly newsletter to promote the growing of native plants and to publicize and promote his seed business. In 1978, he published his book, How to Grow and Know and Grow Texas Wildflowers. Book sales were slow. Although he had 300 orders before he pursued publication, the book did not sell out until 1981. He continued his newsletter and his seed company. By spring of 1977, as he traveled extensively, he saw a need for a native plant society for Texas. At that time, more than a dozen other states had such an organization. He floated the idea to his newsletter subscribers in the summer 1977 edition. Here's a view of that page in the newsletter. The paragraph outlined in yellow is the mention of the Native Plant Society, and the paragraph is enlarged here for readability. In 1978, the president of Texas Women's University, TWU, in Denton, Dr. Mary Evelyn Blagg Huey, asked Carroll Abbott for help in restoring a 1930s era wildflower garden. The garden was restored and was given a historical marker from the State Historical Commission. He subsequently became a guest lecturer at the university, and with the support of TWU staff, planned the first Wildflower Day to be held there in the spring of 1980. It was at that first Wildflower Day that the initial planning for a Texas Native Plant Society was initiated. An interim board was established with a plan to create the society at the next Wildflower Day to be held in April 1981. Carroll Abbott's quarterly newsletter became the official interim publication for the new organization, with details announced in the fall 1980 edition. Newsletter subscribers could join the new organization for an additional charge of $2.50. Non-subscribers could join for $7.50 and receive the quarterly newsletter as well. That announcement resulted in 354 charter members for the new organization. The first meeting of the Native Plant Society was held on April 25th, 1981, on Wildflower Day at TWU. As planning for the new organization was underway, Carroll Abbott began intense lobbying of Texas legislators with the support of TWU students and staff, 3,000 individual signatures, and many garden clubs. As a result, the Texas legislature passed HCR 110 on Monday, April 6, 1981, to set aside the fourth Saturday in April as Texas Wildflower Day. Illness befell him in 1981 but he continued writing his newsletters and supporting wildflower projects. He was given the President's Award by NIPSOT in 1983. That same year, he was honored by a joint resolution of the Texas legislature, with Lady Bird Johnson attending and reading the resolution. Carroll Abbott died on July 6, 1984. For the remainder of this presentation, we will focus on the NIPSOT Kerrville chapter's commemorative garden, honoring him. The garden was proposed and designed by Shannon Smith. Dr. Smith had a background in horticulture and botany. He had worked at many botanical gardens across the country before retiring to the Texas Hill Country and becoming an invaluable help to the NIPSOT Kerrville chapter and to the Riverside Nature Center. More than that, he knew Carroll Abbott personally. As he planned and designed the garden, Shannon developed the plant list by reviewing the Abbott newsletters to find Kerrville area natives that were mentioned. More than 70 species were included in the initial planning. The garden was completed in spring 2016 and dedicated during Riverside Nature Center's Spring Festival on April 23, 2016. The ceremony was attended by members of Carroll Abbott's family, including sons Mark and Patrick, and Abbott family friends. For visitors who are not familiar with Carroll Abbott's story, a large sign is posted at one end of the garden. It outlines his major achievements and his contributions. The left side of the sign highlights his wildflower contributions, as you can see here. And the right side focuses on the wildflower days and the NIPSOT founding. The garden itself is a raised bed bordered in stacked stones. It is approximately 45 feet long by an average of 18 feet wide. The plantings are a mix of annuals and perennials in full sun to shade growing conditions. Here's the other side of the garden, looking at the length of it. As shown here, the garden takes advantage of an existing mature American elm tree and an understory rusty black haw viburnum, the far left side, to provide shade. The garden's sunny end are spring blooming Texas bluebonnets, surrounded by two long blooming perennial salvias, autumn sage and the mealy blue sage. Autumn sage was just selected by our chapter's NICE program as the featured plant for fall 2020. Bloom colors can vary from white to pink to red. While blooms are most prevalent in the spring and fall, sporadic blooms occur throughout the summer and are a good nectar source for hummingbirds and butterflies. Mealy blue sage also blooms best in spring and fall, but can bloom throughout the summer heat, particularly after rains. Bees are especially attracted to the blooms. The chapter's NICE program had selected rock penstemon as the featured plant for spring 2016 when the garden was completed. Here's a photo of the new plant as it began blooming in June of that year. If you're not familiar with this species, it is drought and heat tolerant, blooming throughout the summer. The red tubular blooms are a hummingbird favorite. Here are 3 perennials, yellow Engelmann or cutleaf daisy. It is easy to grow and it's commonly used along roadsides and medians. Pink evening primrose begins blooming in the early spring, continuing until summer. The small plant with the tiny yellow blooms in the center of this picture is Damianita. This one is newly planted, so the size is deceiving. Damianita is a small shrub that blooms spring and fall, growing on dry limestone soils. The plant has a sweet fragrance that makes it highly deer resistant. In this photo are the showy yellow sundrops blooming in the spring. The white Blackfoot daisy begins blooming in early spring and continues until fall. Makes an excellent border for rock gardens. It's heat and drought tolerant. The silvery foliage of low-growing silver ponyfoot makes it an attractive border plant as well as a good ground cover for dry, sunny areas. Moving toward the shadier areas of the garden, cedar sage grows in part shade and blooms in early spring and sporadically summer to fall. The plant grows naturally in the shade and leaf mulch of the hill country's ash junipers. Inland sea oats is a shade grass with attractive seed stalks that are often used in dried flower arrangements. In addition to the wildflowers, trees, shrubs, the garden features some of our native ferns. Here is the Alabama lip fern, which is found in regions with limestone outcrops, often growing in the cracks of the rocks. The plant needs moisture, but with good drainage, and grows in part sun to shade. Here shows the garden has both the purple and white wine cups, growing in sun to part shade and blooming through spring to early summer. Here are 2 fairly rare understory trees or shrubs growing in part shade. The sycamore leaf snowbell and the far less prevalent Texas snowbell grow along steep sides of streams, creeks. Clusters of white bell-shaped blooms occur in the spring. Here's a photo of the blooms of sycamore leaf snowbell. This is a photo of a mature tree that's growing at the Riverside Nature Center that is near but not part of the Abbott garden. Here's another view of the garden taken in 2017, a year after the initial planting. The tall bloom stalks of red yucca dominate the center of the photo. And here are 4 views of the garden taken in spring 2020 with the pink evening primrose and the yellow sundrops as the dominant blooms. Our chapter's website has a page for information on the garden. As you scroll through the page, you will find a link to the Abbott biography written by Ernest Tremaine. That document was the source for all biographical slides included in this presentation. As you may have noticed in the garden photos, each plant is identified by a numbered tag or a tag with a number and common in botanical names. The number refers to an entry in the full list of plants in the garden. The web page provides a link to that list. Here's an example from the list. Each entry contains the number corresponding to the one on the plant tag, a thumbnail photo, the common and scientific names, a USDA reference number, and a link to the information page in the Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Center website. This concludes our discussion. If you are visiting the Carroll area, we invite you to visit Riverside Nature Center and enjoy the Carroll Abbott Garden.
Okay, at this time, I'm going to launch an interview video that we have for Carroll Abbott. We're fortunate, it's a historical video. It's not going to be a high def experience, but I think you will enjoy it. And let me figure out how to share the screen now. Okay.
Signs that spring has arrived in Texas is the color of wildflowers adorning our highways and byways. It seems they grow effortlessly, but in fact, most wildflowers require a great deal of attention. I mean, I can't imagine Texas without its wildflowers, but that might have been the case if not for one man right here in Texas. In 1975, the eyes of Texas caught up with this seed collector in fields just outside of Austin.
Carroll Abbott was behind the scenes in politics for many years. That was a seasonal job, and his usefulness usually ended after elections were held. Now he's in the business of collecting and selling wildflower seeds. He is the only wildflower seed collector we know of in Texas. It all started with Abbott's concern about the future of this state's 5,300 varieties of wildflowers.
The reason I got into it was because nobody else would get into it. For many years, I tried to get state departments, state agencies, different departments of the federal government, private institutions, schools, to become more aware of the increasing diminishing of Texas wildflowers, because I traveled about 50 to 75,000 miles a year along the highways, and I noticed about 10 or 12 years ago that there were less and less of them. And I asked the various agencies to set up some sort of system to get the seed, to learn how to propagate them, to learn how to grow them, and distribute the seeds to schools or to hospitals or to other state agencies and grow them on. And I didn't succeed. And so I got to the point where if nobody else was going to do it, it came to me that I had to do it. The seed pods are all different shapes and sizes and colors, and they're all different heights. Some seed are so fine that they're 3 million to a pound. If you sneeze, you've lost a whole day's work. And they're everywhere. You can find them cracks in pavements, street corners, vacant lots. The best place to look for seeds is to find a sign that says, "Will develop to suit tenant," and call the phone number of this "will develop to suit tenant" and get permission to go out and to get the seeds before this land is bladed under or gouged out and committed to oblivion as far as living plants is concerned. That's the best place, by far the best place, and they are really everywhere and at all seasons of the year. I collect every week of the year.
Carroll Abbott works almost entirely out of his car. All he needs is a sack, a pair of strong legs, and the ability to identify the wildflower seeds when he sees them. He hand picks everything except bluebonnet seeds. A North Texas farmer harvests the seeds of the state flower with a combine and then sells them to Abbott. Abbott's business started off slow, but now it's beginning to pay off. He supplies about 1,500 customers throughout the United States. Recently, he received an order for 1,000 pounds of Texas wildflower seeds. The customer was the state of Arkansas. Abbott's biggest concern is that civilization is slowly eliminating some of the state's most beautiful flowers. Livestock is driving them out of open pastures, and the Texas Highway Department is closing in on them from the other direction by widening the highways. Carroll does not see a day that Texas wildflowers will become altogether extinct, but he does see the supply dwindling. He's hoping to put his seeds in homes and gardens around the world so that this unique beauty that can be found only in Texas will live on forever.
The wildflowers are the only things that are now living here that lived here 200, 100 years ago, that you can hold in your hand and give to somebody else and say, here, have a piece of Texas. I like all the things that I do very much. I enjoy my lifestyle of being able to get up early and walk in the woods or along the river. I like very much hearing from people that write me letters, and I like the nice things that they say about me. You know, thank God we got somebody who's interested enough in Texas that'll go out and do this.
Before his death in 1984, Carroll Abbott was quoted as saying, "For years, it seemed that only God and Lady Bird Johnson, not necessarily in that order, were concerned with wildflower survival." Well, it seems that Mr. Abbott should be on that list as well. September is the time to plant seeds. You can learn how to start your own garden in Doug Wesch's Texas Garden Almanac or by logging on to click2houston.com.
Okay, so let's go to another slide that I want to share at this time. This is a list of additional resources. I believe that our co-hosts are trying to get this list into your chat space on both YouTube and Zoom. But just to go over this quickly, you'll see that the first button is about the Kerrville dedication, and that's posted on our NIPSOT website, and our own Bill Hopkins got it out there for us. The next one is the Mr. Texas Bluebonnet, the Carroll Abbott story by Ernest Tremaine. The Kerrville PowerPoint, she actually referenced that document. And if you'll go, it's actually very interesting because you'll see a portion about Carroll Abbott, but there's also a segment about Ernest and his friendship with Carroll. So I thought that was an interesting resource. The next one that I wanted to mention is the history of the society. And Don mentioned that we'll have another chance to see something about that on Friday. And then the Kerrville chapter website that includes the Carroll Abbott garden information, there is a link to the plant lists on that site. And then there was a reference to Carroll Abbott's newsletters. And Bill shared with us today that at one of the past presidents of the Trinity Forks chapter in Denton actually had those scanned and put into one of our NIPSOT spaces. So that's what that link is if you're interested in seeing some of Carroll Abbott's newsletters. The book that he published is actually a booklet, and it's no longer in print. I believe they said in the narration that they had 300 copies made. The gardens where there's a shop there, a gift shop or a visitor center or something. And apparently on the Kerrville website, it does show that that center offers some of those booklets. They have those available. They have their hours posted. So if you're in the area, you might be fortunate enough to be able to pick one up. And let's see, I want to go to the next slide if I can, maybe. Okay, want to talk a little bit about tomorrow, but actually let me go one more. The narrator mentioned NICE a couple of times in the slideshow, and for our guests and new members that may not know about this program, I'm just going to read this, but NICE was formerly known as Natives Instead of Common Exotics. The NICE acronym has been updated. It now stands for Natives Improve and Conserve Environments. The program's goals still remain the same: to introduce people to great native plants that are available locally to use in place of non-native species. And you'll find as you get involved with NIPSOT that the chapters actually build relationships with area nurseries and partner on this NICE program so that you can, as a shopper, find relatively good plants for your area at that particular nursery that are part of the NICE program. And at this time, if are there any questions in chat that anyone wants to address, Andrea or?
I have two questions. First one is, where in Carroll is Riverside Nature Center? Does anybody know that location?
I think Kathy Saucier is on, and she lives in Fredericksburg. And I think she said it was like 6 miles away. There was something in the chat about that. Do you see that, Andrea?
She's the one that asked the question.
Oh, okay. All right. Because I thought she said it was that close. If you'll, yeah.
She said it was about 30 minutes. She said I live about 30 minutes away. So,
okay. If you'll go to that Kerrville website that we mentioned earlier, the Kerrville chapter website, they actually have a tab for the Carroll Abbott Garden, and it gives you the address and everything there.
okay. And the second one is, does Green Horizons still exist, his seed company? Anyone know?
That I don't know. And I have not tried to Google that.
Yeah, okay. Oh, here's the address, 150 Francisco Lemos Street, Kerrville, 78028. It's in the chat line.
Okay.
150 Francisco Lemos, Lemos Street, Kerrville.
Okay. Anything else?
I think that's all the questions I see. There's a lot of compliments about the presentation. It's very, very good.
Yes, I have to agree. I think the Kerrville team did an excellent job putting that together. We regret that we couldn't have anybody here, but again, on their website for the Kerrville chapter, there is an option to contact them, and they will respond to an email inquiry through that route. So I think I encourage you all to do that and go look at their website. And clearly, if you get a chance, that would be an excellent field trip to make.
Yes, I did find one more. I'm sorry for skipping over it. Do the 70 plus plant species represent all of the plants Carroll Abbott had mentioned in his newsletters? Does anyone know that?
No, I don't know that.
Okay.
That I'm not sure.
I thought that's how it was worded, so I thought that was true.
It sort of this, Don was saying that it seemed like that's what was implied in the slideshow, but
Yes.
I don't actually have any notes that specifically talk about that as a footnoted thing there.
Yeah, but I thought that's what they used to.
But since
Very
that was
good.
their resource, right. And I know she did mention that one of the trees was on the premises, but not part of their garden. And
Right.
so I thought that would be interesting too, is to see how the size of the garden in relation to the whole center there.
Right. Okay, that's all the questions I had. So I'll turn it back over to you.
Yes, I also want to thank, on behalf of our planning committee, everyone that participated today. We appreciate you coming. I want to bring your attention back to the screen. Tomorrow, we have a session at 3 o'clock. That is the Frankfurt Church and Prairie, An Awakening by Kathy Wells Power. And we look forward to seeing as many of you there as possible, and have a good rest of the day.
One last note.
Yes.
Sam Nick, sorry, somebody else can say that better than me, has posted on iNaturalist that observations are going great, but identifications are greatly appreciated and needed. So if you want to see the rest of his post, there's the link in chat. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.